Jeremy. That's okay. I might have you come up with you. Hey, well, good morning. Welcome to Christmas Sunday. Are you excited to be here? Okay, I am too. I love Christmas. Have you ever been, you ever been like super disappointed on Christmas Day? Anybody? Come on, right? Like as a kid, right? You wanted a gift, you wanted something that was amazing, and you were confident you were going to get it, but then you woke up Christmas morning and it wasn't there. Has anybody ever experienced that? Okay, yeah, okay, we had that, and sometimes it's the most wonderful time of the year, right? But sometimes it isn't, and so I remember when we were younger. I was younger. My brother was younger. I have 3 brothers, and my youngest brother, Kylan. He was, I think he was in high school, probably freshman, sophomore high school, didn't have a lot of money at Christmas time. And so my brothers, because we love our little brother, we said, hey, we'll just buy you something for mom and grandma, and then we'll wrap it. And we know you don't have a lot of money. We'll pick it up. We got it this year. And he was like, okay, thanks. Bad move. Because we went and we purchased some items. What we told him they were scarves. Like we got mom and grandma scarves. And so on Christmas morning, the gifts are passing out. And we're like, hey, mom, this gift is from Kylan. Grandma, this gift is from Kylan, you know. And he was like, yeah, that's mine. I got that. Well, then they began to open it, and we had purchased some skimpy women's undergarments. And my mom and my grandmother were opening these things, and my grandma, 80-year-old grandma, what is it? So it was the best thing ever. And so it was great. We loved every minute of it. But they were a little disappointed in their gift from Kylan. But I don't know if they've ever recovered. But anyway, it is Christmas, and here's the thing. It is supposed to be the most wonderful time of year, right? You hear the song, we sing it, it's the most wonderful, we sing that song. But honestly, with all the good that Christmas brings, it also has a tendency to accentuate or highlight the stuff that you don't have or the bad, right? And so Christmas exaggerates the bad, and at sometimes it points us... But regardless of whatever happens at Christmas, it always points us to this time in history and this event with history. And so I was thinking about, Christmas Sunday. What do you talk about? Obviously, Jesus was born, right? And so we're going to talk about that. But I want to kind of go a little bit different direction today. So hopefully you'll bear with me. But here at the foundation of who we are as believers, and if you've been through Starting Point here at our church and you've attended that class, you'll hear this a lot. And some of you people I look at have been through there and know where I'm going with this. But the foundation of our faith is really, as Christians, is really founded on one thing. And it's, for some of you who have been raised in the church, this might be shocking for you to hear, but it's not based on the Bible. Like, the Bible is not a good starting point for people who are coming to faith. And so when you look throughout history, and I know you're like, if you look at history and how people became believers in the early days, the Bible didn't exist for years, and yet people were followers of Christ, and people became Christians. And so how did that happen? It really happened foundationally through answering a question, and that question is, who is Jesus? Who do you think he was? And every single one of us, every person that's ever lived, every Christian that's ever believed, everybody, whether you're a believer or a non-believer here this morning, you will make a decision based on that fact. You will make a decision based on who you think Jesus is. And here's the thing. The event of Jesus' birth happened. It's historically documented. There's proof that there was a baby that was born in Bethlehem who grew up in Nazareth under Roman rule and lived in that, and his name was Jesus. And so there's proof of that. And so regardless of whether you are a believer or you're here this morning and are not a believer, never in the history of mankind has there ever been anyone that has shaped the world like Jesus has. No one in history has shaped the world and had the implications that he has had in our life, in our culture, even in 2021. So this event that happened, and I love this, regardless of what you believe, this event of Jesus' birth happened, and it has shaped our culture and our world for hundreds and even thousands of years. And so when you think about Christmas, and it's the most wonderful time of the year, there's a quote by Andy Stanley, I love it. He says, "Christmas is not the most wonderful time of year because of what's happening, but because of what happened." It's the most wonderful time of the year because of what happened, not necessarily what is happening at the present time in your life and in my life. And so some of the aspects, when you think about Christmas, it's complicated. Like, it can get complicated. Like, families are complicated. Some people haven't been in the same room for 25 years. It's uncomfortable. It's dysfunctional. There's pain and misunderstanding. We have loss of loved ones. There are people who will not be at the Christmas dinner table this year that were there last year. There are things that are going on. There are diagnoses that happen that has made this cloud, this black cloud, hover over whatever it is that you've got going on in your life and in your family, whether it's a diagnosis or some problem with your finances or some other piece of stress or anxiety. I talked to somebody in the first service this morning. I was asking them about their family and their kids, and it was like, well, there's just a lot of it. She just has a lot of anxiety. She's wrestling with this. And more in our culture today, I'm hearing of people who have this issue with anxiety, and we're worried over junk going on in our life and in our culture, and a lot of it is beyond our control. It's stuff that you can't fix. It's people you can't fix. Maybe it's your own self that you can't fix. There's problems within ourselves. Like, I'm the problem. Like, there are things that I do, like Paul said, I don't want to do, and things that I want to do that I don't do. And so we have this wrestling with and so every time at Christmas, this time of year, we're reminded that there are problems that we can't solve. There are people that we can't control. There are expectations that we can't meet. And there is hurt that doesn't ever seem to heal. And there are circumstances that are beyond our control. And so we're reminded of that at Christmas. But I want to remind you that Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, not because of what is happening in our lives, but because of what has happened. And so when you think about Christmas and Easter, it's like one of those holidays that everybody comes to church. Everybody comes, and whether you're a believer or unbeliever, maybe if you're an unbeliever, you're just like, yeah, I'm just going to go just in case. I'm going to check that box. If God comes back and all this is real, I can say, hey, I was there. Hey, I was there on Christmas. Like churches somehow. But we kind of call those, there's a name, they call them creasters, because you come on Christmas and Easter, but that's okay. We're just glad you're here. We don't care when you come. But we have this, it's unlike Easter. Christmas is so unlike Easter, and Easter is the other Christian holiday, right? And we take a day and we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus because he was a real person. We know that he walked on the face of the earth. We know that he was crucified by the Romans. And we, as Christians, what separates us apart from other people are the fact that we actually believe that this dead guy rose again. And so we take a day, here in a few months, we'll celebrate Easter, and it'll be a big Christian holiday, and people will come to church, and we'll celebrate Easter. But it's unlike Christmas. Christmas is just different. It's special, right? Like some of you, I show of hands, who's had your tree up since before Thanksgiving? Come on, look at them. People, they're proud. Like, yeah, we have. We put it up in September, even before Halloween, but whatever it is, but it's just like this whole event, right? Like it's this incredible event that has, regardless of whether you believe or not, it consumes our culture, it consumes our economy. I think $9 billion or something is what people will spend on Christmas this year. It's crazy in America. And so it drives all of this. But unlike Easter, it's an event, and it's more than a day of celebration. This event that God sent his son into the world in the center of our lives, and this event has the ability to change our lives and to recenter it. It has the ability to move us out of the people we are into different people. It has the ability to make us do things that we normally wouldn't do, and it gives us hope, and it stabilizes us, and it gives us a sense of purpose, and we don't fear even though we have stuff to be afraid of, and we hurt And as Christians, we have hurt in our life, but we're not hopeless, right? You ever see Christians who walk through that, and people who have lost loved ones, they have this sense of hope. And those are words you see all over Christmas. It's because it's Advent, right? It's love and joy and hope and peace. All those words that we associate with Christmas, we find through a relationship with this guy named Jesus. Now, so when Jesus becomes the center of our lives, all of that stuff that happens. Have you ever looked, and the other interesting thing about this time of the year, after this Christmas Sunday, we'll begin to shift gears, right? We'll take down the tree and we'll start putting it up, and we'll start to think about next year and what we want different. Some of you will make a resolution and some of you won't, and some of you will make a resolution and break it by the first week. I'll see a lot of you in the gym for about a week. And then you'll be gone. But we'll make all these. But you ever look back, like you ever think about your life and look back at the decisions that you have made that have brought you to the point that you are right now? I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you're 10 or 25 or 50 or 80. We have a tendency at the end of the year to look backwards, don't we? And we take a look at all of the seemingly meaningless decisions that we have made in our life, and it culminates to get us to where we are currently right now. This past year, in 2021, my wife's grandmother passed away. She was 102 years old when she passed, just shy of her 103rd birthday. And I got to thinking about her at the end of her life and all of the stuff that she must have witnessed in the course of her life. In 102 years, present on this spinning ball that we're all on, what has she seen? I mean, she lived through 2 world wars, Prohibition, the Great Depression, cars, TVs, microwaves, smartphones. I mean, that's a span, 102 years. When you look back on your life and take into account all that you've seen and all that you've done and all of the hurt and all of the heartaches and all of the wins and all of the losses and all of the pain and all of the success, and everything that you look back on has an impact on our life, doesn't it? And so I want to go a little bit different direction with the Christmas story this morning. Typically on Christmas Sunday, you would come and you would hear the story that you've heard 1,000 times before, right? Like, okay, we know Mary, little baby, got this little baby. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in the mangers, and shepherds heard on high, and angels sang, and wise men came, and people gave gifts. And it's an amazing story. And it is a miracle, like Jeremy said, this incredible miracle that God became human in his son Jesus and entered our world. That is a miracle of Christmas, absolutely. But when we look at the story and the fact that when we look at all of that has happened, it takes a different meaning when we start to look back on it. I mean, all of the things that we look at, and when you see, there's these seemingly meaningless decisions that you make in your life, and I just started thinking about my own life, and I remember I moved to Salem in 1992 because I met a girl. Funny how that happens, isn't it? I met a girl, moved to Salem when I was 23. I married the girl, had a family with that same girl. My kids. I got a job that led to a career. And my kids argued with their mother over going to youth group. And that led me to leading youth for this church, which led me to become your pastor, to quit my job and become your pastor. And just all these things that happen in our life, and I couldn't help but think of this Christmas story. And we pick up the Christmas story in the Gospels. And if you're new to church and you don't know what the Gospels are, they're basically the first 4 books in your New Testament. So it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, real people, okay? And it's basically these followers that were with Jesus or heard about Jesus or gave their own account. They basically took account of what they saw and experienced with this Jesus and then wrote that stuff down, and we still have it thousands of years later in your Bible. That is in your nightstand or somewhere where you can't find it, or it's on your phone or whatever. It's amazing that we still have these stories. And so all 4 of those accounts, there's only two of them that chose to write about the actual birth story of Jesus. It was Luke, who was a physician. He just set out to write the most accurate thing he could get. He came from kind of a scientific mind. He was a physician. And then we had Matthew. Only Luke and Matthew tell us about the birth of Jesus. That's where you get the story of, hey, there was, the angel appeared to Mary, and she gave birth and wrapped him in swaddling clothes. And we get all that birth story from either Luke or Matthew. There are two other Gospels. And I want to focus on John. John was a disciple. He was a follower of Jesus. And here's what we know about John. His dad was a fisherman. He was a blue-collar kind of a guy, just had a regular job like anybody else. Got up, went to work, went out, threw the nets out, caught fish, came in. It was just like make the donuts every day. Speaking of donuts, did you have a couple? I did. Anyway, John was just a fisherman. He did what he knew to do. And in one point in time in his life, he became a follower of Jesus. And from then, it's believed that he is the only disciple, and some of you know this and some of you don't, but he's the only disciple that died of old age. He is the only guy that made it to old age. All the other ones were martyred or killed for what they believed in their following of Jesus. Eventually, they died in horrific deaths. Some of them were beheaded. Some of them were crucified. Go research how disciples died. And you'll find that John was the only one. They took him and put him on an island and said, hey, you're going to live out the rest of your days here on this island. And that's what he did. And so I want to look at what he wrote. And when John, when he was an old man, I want you to get your head there. And think about this guy who followed Christ around. He just followed him. He walked around. He saw what he did. He was there for it all. He's the only one that lived to old age. And at the end of his life, at the very end of his life, he decided, hey, maybe I should write some of this down. And I should tell people about the stuff that I've seen. Because John was there. He witnessed it all. All the good, all the miracles that Jesus did. But he was also there when he was crucified. He smelled it. The smell of death in the air. He witnessed all of the blood and the gore and the brutality of his friend Jesus being crucified. He stood at the foot of the cross with his arms around Mary, this young girl, probably not super old, watching her son die on a cross. He held Mary. He comforted her. He had lost all hope. He outran Peter to the tomb and stuck his head inside. I mean, can you imagine the stories that John could have told? Can you imagine sitting with John for a second or for 5 minutes and picking his brain? Man, John, can you tell me, what was it like? How did Mary react? What did you say to her? How did Mary feel? How did she handle it? So when we read the book of John, instead of shepherds and wise men and a birth narrative, John went straight to the point. When he got down to the end of his life, he's an old man. He's experienced loss like you and I have never seen or will ever see. I don't care what your story is like. He's lost friends. He has lost family members. In some way, he lost his entire culture and his way of life. Do some research about what happened to Jerusalem after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. You see, it was under Roman rule, and Rome had built an empire based on violence and slavery. Israel was enslaved as a nation, and the Jews lived under this crazy emperor who launched legions of soldiers into Judea and Jerusalem. John saw, witnessed, and survived unimaginable horror. He foresaw even more horror. He survived in a Roman legions marching through Galilee and herding Jewish people into the city of Jerusalem, and then Rome would eventually overthrow Jerusalem. The Roman armies established a permanent camp just outside the city walls. They dug a trench around the circumference of the walls and built it as high as the city walls. And anyone caught fleeing the city would be captured, crucified, and then placed in lines on top of a hill surrounding the city. They estimated that 500 crucifixions took place a day. For 7 months, the people of Jerusalem were left to starve. Disease broke out. And then finally, in AD 70, Titus, you can read this is history, breached the outer walls, and the city fell, and the temple burnt to the ground. And Josephus claims that 1,100,000 people lost their lives that day. 97,000 of people that John probably knew were taken prisoners by the Roman Empire. And the destruction of the temple ended the Old Testament Judaism. John's friends were probably literally fed to lions in the Colosseum. And by the time that John wrote this gospel, the time that he sat down to write this letter that you and I read in our Bible, his friend Peter and his friend Paul had been murdered by the Roman government. Imagine what John had seen. Imagine what he had smelt and witnessed. It was dark as it has ever been in the history of the world. And still, John believed. He believed in something. And instead of, here's what happened in the manger, and here's what the shepherds came and brought gifts, here's how John started his gospel. I'm going to back up, Kathy. John 1:4 says, "In him was life, and that life was light of all mankind. The light shines in darkness, and darkness has not overcome it." In the darkest moment, that's how John, when he sat down at the end of his life and he remembered all that he had seen and all that he had witnessed and all of the horror and all of the tragedy and all of the nightmare that was his life in Jerusalem in that period of time, here's how he started his gospel. But then he goes on later in chapter 20 of his letter, and he tells us in 2021 why he wrote what he wrote. Here it is, verse 30. I want you to picture John. He's an old man. He's trying to capture everything that he's witnessed over the course of his life. And here's what he says. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. In other words, he's saying, there's so much more I could tell you. He did amazing things. So much more than you and I will ever know. John witnessed firsthand. And then in verse 31, he tells us why he wrote what he wrote. But these are written. In other words, I wrote this. These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and by believing you may have life in his name. In other words, the reasons I'm writing this down, and the reason there's so much I could tell you, the reason I'm writing this is not that you'll just be amazed, but yet you will believe that Jesus is in fact the Messiah. He is the Son of God. And by believing in him, you might have life. Not physical life, because we're all breathing here this morning, but spiritual life. Like we can have a life in him that is beyond explanation. So in spite of what John had seen and what he had smelled and what he had lost, John still believed that Jesus this little baby that grew up into a man, was the source of some kind of life beyond the physical. He believed that. So where do you begin with the story of Jesus, John? I mean, he took care of Mary, Jesus' mother, after Jesus died and was resurrected. He took care of her. If anybody had firsthand account of what the birth story would have been like, it would have been John. He probably had all the deets on what went down. Hey, Mary, what was it like in the stable? Hey, Mary, how long were you in labor? Hey, Mary, what'd that smell like? Hey, Mary, where'd you go? What'd you do? How'd you dress him? How'd you feed him? Where'd you guys go? What was that? He would have had all of those details, and yet he chose, when looking back over the course of his life, the most important thing that John wanted to tell us was that light had come into this world in an incredibly dark, evil, savage world. And light had overcome the darkness. That's when he begins his Gospels. He didn't start in the manger or with shepherds or wise men or angels. And as he sat to write in these dark, dark times, he remembered a story when Jesus began, and it was dark there. Herod the Great ruled as a Roman king and was a madman that murdered babies and members of his own family. John skipped the baby stories and went straight to the message based on what he had seen and heard. And here's what he said, and it's so significant for where we are today. I mean, in a time of our lives when things are so complicated, we're reminded of who is coming. We're kind of reminded of who's coming at Christmas and who's not. We're reminded of what we won't get and what we will never get. And we're reminded that what our kids want and what we can't provide. But here's how John chooses to start his gospel. Remembering all that he'd done through, despite everything that he'd seen, despite his friends and watching his family and friends and people that he loved literally murdered. In spite of all of that, he says, in him was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. In that newborn and in the man, there was something so powerful that it broke through even the darkest of injustices the world could serve up. He's saying that his friend Jesus brought something for everyone. And in the best way John knew to describe, he said he was light of the world. Because everything in the world was dark. And then John makes one of the most remarkable statements in the New Testament. And I love it. The light shines in darkness. And darkness has not overcome it. In light of everything that he'd seen, and in light of all that Rome had done and the religious leaders had done to squelch this message of the good news of Jesus, I can almost see John saying that. Well, light, darkness tried, but you're not going to overcome it. Darkness tried, but it will not win. And nearing the end of his life, and looking back, I think he wrote it with a grin on his face, that light shines in darkness, but it has not overcome it. Darkness tried. Caesar couldn't do it. Nero couldn't do it. The Roman Empire couldn't do it. Tiberius couldn't do it. The death of Jesus couldn't do it. And I look at my life, and I think of our lives in 2021 and all that we've got going on in our world and in the dark world that we live in. This is true in my life. In spite of the horrible decisions that I've made, in spite of the sin that I've committed, and how hard Satan tries to tempt me, there is light that still shines in my heart. There's still light that shines in your heart. And no matter what we face, no matter how deep the depression, no matter how overwhelming the grief, in spite of darkness in our world, as much as darkness has tried to overcome it, tries to seize the light, tries to shadow it, tries to blow out the light, there is light in this world, and darkness will not overcome it. John knew with certainty, even as he faced the end of his days, that this light had begun as a match in a manger, and it had continued to burn bright with life that was and is the light of all mankind. So, last Jeremy, so this Christmas, I'm just going to, for a second here, I'm going to let you out early. I know Cheryl was really happy that I let him out early since we fed your kids a bunch of donuts before we sent them back there. I think it's easy for us at Christmas to be reminded of the hurt. There are people we can't control. Family situations that we will never be able to fix. There are things that we've done and said that we can't forgive ourselves of. And as we experience the complication of unmet expectations, as we miss loved ones, as we're constantly reminded of darkness, as we're hit in the face with financial pressures, as we love those ones that we miss, we're reminded that there is a light in life that penetrates the darkness. And it's in there that we find hope. So what makes this the most wonderful time of the year is not necessarily what is happening, but what happened when Jesus came to this earth. It's what happened that changes Christmas. It's not necessarily what's going on right now. I know some of you may be walking through some really dark things right now. It's not that doesn't matter, but the light will overshadow that. And I want to leave you with this. John chapter 1, verse 4 through 5. Stand with me. John chapter 1, verse 4 through 5 says this. Just remember this verse as you leave here today. In him was life, and that life was the light of mankind. And the light shines in darkness, and darkness has not overcome it. Not then, not now, not ever. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this light that you sent into an incredibly dark, evil world in your Son, Jesus. Father, thank you for that sacrifice. And as we pause here and as we leave here and we'll celebrate Christmas with our families and we'll go eat meals in this week, and toward the end of the week we'll gather together with our friends and family, and some of us will gather alone. And some of us will be reminded that times are hard and it doesn't feel joyful and it doesn't feel hopeful. But Lord, let this be a reminder that light came into this world, and no matter how hard evil tries to squelch it, it will never overcome the light that is Jesus Christ. Father, we thank you so much for loving us the way you do. Thank you for this message of hope and joy and peace. Father, I just pray if there's somebody here this morning, maybe for the first time in their life, they want to accept the fact that you are, in fact, the Messiah. It's the reason why John wrote this, so that we might believe. And maybe there's somebody here this morning that would choose to believe for the very first time, and this Christmas may be like the best Christmas ever. Father, I just pray that you would meet that need. You know where they are. That we would just invite you into our hearts and our lives and our family. Lord, some of us are so incredibly blessed with family and everything that we need, and we have everything that we would ever want for and hope for in life. Lord, help us never to forget the sacrifice that you made so that can be the case in our lives. Thank you for loving us this morning, Lord. Thank you for the hope that we have in Christmas, that we can leave here encouraged that no matter what happens, you are still in control of this world and our lives. We love you so much, Jesus. Thank you for all that you've done for us. Thank you for this church. I pray that you would walk through each and every family situation that's represented here today. And we'll give you all the praise and glory in your precious holy name. Amen. Thank you. Have a great week and have a Merry Christmas.